Hi everyone, my name is Becc Holland. I'm the head of sales development at chorus.ai. Welcome to Flip the Script session 3 over emails. So a little background over what Flip the Script is. Flip the Script is a 4-session series on how to become a lethal prospector overnight. So session 1, we started with objection handling. Session 2 was over how to structure a cold call and a way to cause conversion. And then today with session 3, we're going to cover emailing in the written word, what to type to your prospects to win a meeting. So with no further ado, let's jump into the content. As far as an agenda, we're going to have 4 pieces to this session. The first piece is going to be on how to structure an email at large. The second piece, we're going to transition into how to tease out a premise or a reason for outreach to your prospect. And then we're going to finish with the third part being the 7 pillars of attractive messaging. What are the flavors that you should have in the background of your messaging? And then we'll finish with the 7 deadly sins of messaging that you want to make sure to leave out. So structure of an email. For a structure of an email, I actually take a page out of the M.J. Hoffman, the author of Why You Now, his playbook on the F-shaped email. So an email, you want to have 3, max 4 lines, not paragraphs, within your email to get your prospect's attention and speak to them in a way that drives value to them in their day-to-day. So the first line, you want to be about your premise. And the premise needs to be a reason for your outreach and what about the prospect or their company made you think that it would be a good idea to reach out. So this will be the longest line of your email. And you want to make sure that it's all about the prospect and anything that they did that made you think it was a good reason to reach out. As far as the second portion, the first thing you need to know about reading an email, actually on Laptop, Google did a study about how your prospects read emails. They start at 2 o'clock on your email and they go clockwise. So what that communicates to you about writing emails is that your prospect on Laptop is going to read the end of your premise line first. They're then going to loop around to the end of your CTA or the last line of your message. They're then going to loop around to the beginning of your CTA or call to action. And then if all that lines up with them, they're going to loop around to the middle and the body. So actually the least valuable real estate within your email is going to be the body and what you do as a company. It's pretty shocking, right? But what prospects want to know first is who are you? And that's why they look at the premise line first. Then they want to know what you want. And if all of that lines up within their value system, they're going to go around to the body. So when it comes to the body, it should be the medium-sized length line out of your email. And the constituents of it should be, what does your company do in terms of value prop as opposed to features? So I see a lot of SDRs out in the community or AEs that are self-prospecting want to talk about what their company does as a whole. So for instance, over here at Chorus, the example would be, we want to say, Chorus, we record, transcribe, and analyze sales conversations to tease out, what your reps are doing on the phone. But really, all that communicates is what we do as a company. But I want to talk to the prospect in terms of what matters to them and what pains they have in their day-to-day that we alleviate. So a great example of that would be, what if you could turn all of your B players into A players on your sales team? Or what if you can ensure that all of the reps who are struggling to hit quota are having conversations in a way that causes them to exceed quota attainment? So just a couple examples, but in your body, you want to zero in on the value prop that you deliver to your buyer persona and the person that you're reaching out to, as opposed to what your company does and how you get there. And then the last line of your email should be a CTA, or that's short for call to action. So basically, you should be requesting one time from your prospect. I never do multi-times, but I say, if you give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack whatever you talked about in your above email. So a great example would be, if you give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack how VPs of sales leverage Chorus to drive quota attainment and make sure their onboarding ramp time is quick, I promise that we can part ways as friends if you're not impressed. Deal? So you basically want to make sure that you give your prospect an agenda for the time and ask for one time in specific. In my experience, your prospects aren't wondering whether Thursday at 2 is open. Your prospects are wondering whether you can deliver value to them and what kind of value can you deliver if you can. So if you, in the first 2 lines, are driving enough personalization and you're driving enough value, then working out the scheduling is not going to be the issue. So that's the structure of an email. The CTA should be the shortest line. Didn't want to leave that out. So now we know the structure of an email, but how do we pick out a premise? How do we pick out something that really resonates with our prospect? How do we tease something out about them or something that they did that will cause them to say that they want to talk to us? So as far as the structure, before we get into the 5 premise buckets, why don't I tell you a little bit of background and backing of how I tease these out. So I knew that typically whenever people think of personalized outreach within emailing, they think of one of 3 graphics, as I call them. They think that they should base them on firmographics, something about a company, whether this is industry segment, whether that's employee size, or whether that's product sophistication. But firmographics is some kind of principle about the company that the prospectors would segment on to do outreach. The second graphics is technographics. What kind of integration stack do they have? What kind of tech stack do they have that plays more friendly with your product? So for instance, over here at Chorus, we like for them to have what's called a sales engagement vendor. Maybe use Outreach or InsideSales.com or SalesLoft, Groove, Yesware, just to name a few. But we want to know that they have a sales engagement vendor and that they have some kind of web conferencing or dialer. So a technographic principle would be if I segmented all my users based on who used Outreach or someone, a sales engagement vendor that we integrate with. The third kind of graphic is a demographic. Most of what you're familiar with, you can segment your users based on age, gender, education level would be one. But today what we zero in on is their profession. So maybe someone's an accountant, maybe someone is in HR, maybe someone's in finance. But for over here at Chorus, we want to know that they're in sales, or VP of sales would be our ICP. So that was the extent of how in the past people have personalized. They thought, I'm going to tease out a demographic principle, I'm going to tease out a technographic principle, or I'm going to tease out a firmographic principle of how to do outreach. So, if I know, for instance, firmographically, they're in the B2B SaaS world or fintech, then I'm going to tailor my case studies to be all about fintech customers. So that's where personalization had lied to date. But the sneaky suspicion that I had is that what about this fourth, psychographic principles? Psychographics, just for background, is everything that someone believes, is something that someone's interested in, maybe they have an attitude towards it, but it's something that hits them a little bit more at their core. So a great instance of this is Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk has the demographic principle of that his education is he did not go to college, and he has the psychographic principle that he believes that you don't have to have a typical education to be successful in the tech world. So when you see him posting on LinkedIn, or what he's most fervent about, you see him posting that you don't have to have a typical background educationally to be successful in the workplace. So if you want to get an immediate response or bump conversion, then I suggest laying in the psychographic principle. So I basically got out a sheet and said, what are all the things that you could reach out to someone based off of? An exhaustive list of mutual connections or schools that they went to, and develop them into the following 5 buckets. I had theories on which one would cause the highest conversion based on if they interwove into their base methodology a psychographic principle or not. But then I A/B tested them and found the following results. So we'll start with the list of 5, but the number 1 is going to be the principles with the highest trigger rate, and then we'll go down to the principles in the buckets with the lowest trigger rate. So let's start with the highest. Number 1 is going to be self-authored content. So this is going to be, any kind of post that your prospect release, any kind of article, any kind of webinar or session like this. If they author the content, this is going to be the number 1 hit rate. We'll go into a little bit later the rules of engagement, but the rules of engagement here are whatever premise that you tease out, you need to then relate back to your product or your company. So if you were picking some kind of article or webinar, I had seen people in the past do a 10-80-10 rule, what's called a 10-80-10 rule. 10% is personalized, 80% is not in buyer persona, and 10% is personalized. But then how that ends up looking like is this. Hi, Becc, I noticed that you went to Texas A&M. We over here at Chorus help drive quota attainment for sales reps. Would you give me a time to unpack that? So even though this first line was tailored, there's no hook throughout. So I suggest instead of doing the 10-80-10 rule, that you want to make sure whatever premise that you're teasing out hooks into what you do as a value prop. So that's kind of the rule, if you will, whenever I'm looking through content, So the first bucket that I'm going to look through in summary is, did they write anything? Did they author anything, any kind of webinar, post, or write any kind of article that I then can tease out one line and relate back to what my product does? If I can't find anything in that bucket, I go on to the second bucket, which is engaged content. This isn't going to be quite as high of a trigger rate because they didn't author the content themselves, but still pretty reasonably high. So engaged content is any kind of post that they liked, any kind of post that they shared or commented on. So I typically give the post and author for premise of like, hi, Sean, I noticed that you liked MJ Hoffman's post the other day on selling effectively. One line that really stood out to me was X. Or hi, Sean, I noticed that you commented on MJ Hoffman's post the other day. Your comment really stood out to me when you covered X. What if you could X without X? So you want to mention it for context, and then you want to hook into in the second line or the body line how your product relates to that. So the second is engaged content, anything that they liked, shared, or commented on. The third premise bucket, probably my favorite premise bucket, is called self-attributed traits. So if you go onto LinkedIn and you go to anyone's profile page, there are 3 places where you can find self-attributed traits. You can find them in their headline. Sometimes I've seen people say like, Mark Cosglow is a great example over at Outreach. If you go to his headline, he talks about how killing it and crushing it combined together means krilling it. So that's his headline, and you can typically see just in a little snapshot what people do for a living as opposed to their title. The second place that you can find that is within someone's profile line. So for instance, if you go to my profile on LinkedIn, it will say, a homegrown Texan who innately believes hiring the right people is just as important as developing them. So the headline is going to give to you, that's the main database of where I'm teasing out these self-attributed traits, because someone is self-authoring this and telling you and communicating to the market what matters to them. So typically they're viewing it as more of a resume, so they'll talk kind of highly about themselves of like, scales teams effectively or focuses in on, SDR best practice or, really likes accounting and modernizing that world. But what you can do with this is you can say, hi, Sean, or hi, Becc, I really enjoyed your profile line on hiring the right people is just as important as developing them. What if you could ensure that both priorities of hiring and developing were both simultaneously being achieved? So you want to, again, hook what your product does back to the profile line. So the third one that you can use is within the company line. Oftentimes people, if you go down to my profile, for instance, it'll say head of sales development at Chorus. And underneath it, sometimes people talk about their company and what they do. Sometimes people put the website, but then oftentimes they put their quota attainment or things that matter to them or things that they're up to over the company. So the 3 places that you can find that is profile line, headline, and company line. What's interesting about this bucket, I would say what causes the most conversion for this bucket is someone is really communicating to you what matters to them. So if you then position it back to them of, hey, I really enjoyed, and reminding them, hey, Becc, you really like developing people, they have to at least admit one of 2 realities. Either A, they do care about what you're talking about, or B, their profile line is false. So they'll usually stick with A of like, okay, this person did research and they know it's important to me because I just communicated it to them on the LinkedIn profile. So that bucket is probably my favorite because you can know what's important to your buyer within their own words. If I can't find anything in the first bucket, and I can't find anything in the second bucket, and I can't find anything in the third bucket, I then move on to what I call affectionately the junk drawer. The junk drawer is going to be comprised of social media interests, schools that they attended, personal hobbies, things that matter to them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But basically, this is anything that is important to someone that's outside the peripheral vision of their job and what they do. So some ICPs really like this more than others. In my experience, marketing, HR, and about half of sales leaders really like junk drawer premises. But all I would encourage is that you have to remember that whatever you mention in the first line, you need to link back to what your company does. So if you talk to me about, hi, Becc, I noticed from your Facebook profile that you have a love for pizza. you better be ready to justify to me what your product does in terms of pizza. So for instance, over here at Chorus, if I were to say, hi Becc, reason for my outreach is I saw from your Instagram profile that you really like pizza. When it comes down to pizza, it's all about highlighting and having quality ingredients. What if you could bump the quality of the ingredients of your sales conversations that you're having on your team and make sure that you get more quality every day? Give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack how VPs of sales or heads of sales development leverage Chorus to turn all of those ingredients on their sales teams into top performers. So that's just kind of a silly instance, but remember with the junk drawer premises, usually a technical buyer doesn't like this quite as much, but you just want to link this back. It's imperative that you link it back to what your company does. If I can't find anything in the first 4 buckets, the first 4 buckets are a combination of demographic, firmographic, but most importantly, psychographic principles. So the 5th bucket, the reason it has the lowest hit rate is the 5th bucket is about company premises. So this is firmographic only. It's the only bucket that doesn't have to do with something that someone believes or has an interest in. So I will say that this is the 5th one, but I will say this is also the lowest conversion in my experience. So company is the 5th bucket. Maybe they did some kind of merger and acquisition, M&A, they made some kind of post on LinkedIn, they have a really interesting website or they have different hiring needs. But my biggest suggestion here is people have learned how to mass blast based on company. So they'll say, for instance, hi, Sean, I noticed that your company is growing. So because the sales development community has tried to leverage sales engagement to get out a mass amount of emails and hide the fact that it's a mass amount of emails, I would recommend being the more detailed, but the more brief, the better. So the difference between a mass blast and a personalization in the company case would be, hi, Sean, I noticed that your company is growing. Hi, Sean, this could be mass blast. Hi, Sean, I noticed that your company has grown 63% over the last 6 months and just added 17 new reps to your sales team. So the difference between those two is in one case, I trigger to my buyer, there is no way that this could have been a mass blast, whereas the other one, could have been. So now we know the first 5 buckets and we know how to pick out a premise or tease out a premise to make our prospect want to respond to us. But what does the rest of the email look like? And how can I maintain consistency among my reps if I'm personalizing at this level? For this, I'd have to defer to the Chuck Jones story. So actually the Chuck Jones story was told to me about 2 months ago by our CEO, Roy, over here, Renani. And Chuck Jones is the creator of the rules of animation. So think Wile E. Coyote or Roadrunner. And a little bit of background on Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones grew up in Spokane, Washington, and then his dad moved him down to Los Angeles, and his dad was an unsuccessful businessman. And every single time, true story, his dad got a job, he would get new company letterhead, and he would get pencils and write the company name on both of them. And then every time he'd get fired, he'd give them to Chuck Jones and say, hey, I want you to use these up as quickly as possible. So Chuck, in effort to please his father, started drawing all the time. Drawing. Different characters, different animals. And he is known for, he drew upwards of 200,000 drawings. And he attributes that after 100,000 drawings, instead of just focusing on the drawing itself, he started thinking about the rules of animation. So for instance, if I'm going to turn an animal into a character, these are the rules. Or if we're going to draw a head, this is the ambit and the direction and the rules of engagement around drawing a head, or a foot or a hand should look like this. So when it came to Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, he knew that he wasn't the genesis of all great ideas. So he hired a really creative team of writers and he said, I don't care how you get there, but these are the rules of engagement and this is the direction behind it. So a couple of examples, there were 9 rules in total. A couple of examples were the Roadrunner can't harm the coyote except for by going beep beep. Whenever possible, the biggest enemy of the coyote is going to be gravity. And so when I think back to all of the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner stories, they all fit within those 9 rules. So when it comes down to dictating the rest of the email, and I think why people haven't personalized in the past is they thought, okay, there's no way to really control the consistency of messaging. What if I have new reps? How can I make sure that they're staying within the certain rules of engagement that I want? So how I iron this out is by basically creating the rules of engagement for writing an email. So I have the 7 pillars and the 7 deadly sins of what to avoid, but let's start with the 7 pillars. The first is going to be prospect-centric. So by the way, taking a step back, I started with the pillar that I think is done least well in the industry, and then we'll get on to premises that are the pillars that I see done most well. The first pillar is going to be prospect-centric. So I have my SDRs focus all on the prospect. So instead of being aggressive in the amount of volume of emails that they're sending, I have them be properly aggressive on the amount of research that they're doing about my prospect. So every single word, in my opinion, should be about the prospect in your email. When it comes down to value prop, that's easy for us. When it comes down to a premise, it's a little bit tougher. But even down to like social proof, for instance, I don't say we're working with Slack. I want to dictate out to my prospect the reason why I'm mentioning that social proof. So I'd say, we're working with companies like you in terms of size, for example, Slack. So you want to give them reference, even for social proof, of how it relates to the prospect that you're writing to, so that you make sure to make that email all about them. The second pillar is going to be pain-centric. So I actually was in the hospital a couple of years ago, and I thought through if there had been 2 realities and someone said, okay, I have $5,000 and I can spend it on one of 2 things. I can spend it on a pill to take this pain away, or I can spend it on a trip to Cabo after the pain is relieved and once I'm better. I thought through which one I would pick and why. And which one I would pick in that instance is absolutely the pill. So most of our buyers, it will drive more urgency with them if you're talking about the pains that they have in their day-to-day and how you can relieve those pains through your product over the features and benefits and wonderful things that your product does. The third one is going to be pride averse, or how to be pride aversive within your outreach. If I had to diagnose why the SDRs, over here at Chorus do so well, it's because they're super pride aversive in their language. So in my experience, everyone doesn't like ego because everyone has it. So for instance, if I was to go to dinner with someone and someone were to ask me, tell me a little bit about yourself, and I were to go on the following monologue, how do you think that they would react? If I said, well, my name's Becc and I'm with Chorus, and, Chorus loves me and the CEO really likes me. My job's great. I'm crushing it over there. I crushed in the gym. I'm a super great runner. My family loves me. On and on and on I went. Then the person after the 30-minute monologue would probably not ask for the check. So it's interesting because mostly within the human psyche, we want to build rapport with our prospects, and we think that how we do that is by talking well of ourselves. Instead, I turn that into the prospect, and how can I focus on the prospect and build rapport by adding value to them? So within pride aversion, there's 2 different pieces. There's passive submission and what I call prospect fandom, and then there's proactive humility. Passive submission and prospect fandom a little bit goes like this. You want to be all about your prospect. You want to know their entire career. You want to know webinars that they've been a part of. You want to know content that they've written. You want to know conferences they've gone to. You want to know all about their work, because in inherently being about them, you tilt the focus away from you and you tilt the hero and the fandom back onto them. So a great example of this is I once walked into a dinner and I ran into, I won't mention his name, but I ran into a VP of sales over at Pandora. And he said to me, he says that he still remembers this moment. He said, hi, Becc, I think we're connected on LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, hi, blank. I think I've been following your career for 3 years. Let me tell you the top 5 reasons why I prefer Pandora over Spotify and why I think that you guys should take the market. On and on and on I went, listing the reasons of all of the wonderful things I thought about Pandora. He said that changed the tide of whether he was interested in my product or not, because I knew so much of his background. So I would always suggest you should know who you're talking to before you talk to them. The other piece is the proactive humility. So in my experience, I think that the reason why prospects aren't responding to us is not because they're a bad person. It's not because they delight in not responding to us. It's not because they're playing a game with us. It's because the onus is on us. We haven't written something compelling enough to make them want to learn further about my product. So in proactive humility, I typically bring that full frontal for them. So I covered this a lot in objection handling, but sometimes in my emails, I'll even go so far as to say like, hi blank, this would be a follow-up to an email. Hi, Sean. The reason for my outreach is I saw this article the other day about being relevant to your buyer persona, and I got convicted about the message that I sent to you. With your permission, I'd like another shot to earn some of your time. So this pillar is the most important in my opinion. You want all of your outreach to be about the prospect, and you want it, if you're going to highlight the benefits and the wonderful things about anyone, highlight the wonderful things about your prospect, not yourself. So the last 4 pillars, I'll be pretty brief here. The 4th pillar is going to be fluidity. You want to make sure that you connect your premise to your body, to your CTA. It's really easy to do in theory. It's really hard to do in practice. So one tip that I would have in fluidity is that whatever language finite words you use in the first line, you use in the second line, and you use in the third line. So typically when I see SDRs struggling with this, it's because they pick multi-value props of their company. So for instance, at Chorus, we help with a litany of things. We help with driving quota attainment for account executives. We help with cold calling and best practice there. We help decrease onboarding and ramping time. But instead of picking all 3 of those value props in one email, I want to pick one and make sure that I nail it home. And then if I don't get a response, I want to pick the second one and third and so on. So fluidity, nailed it that time, is all about picking one premise and making sure that whatever you highlight in the premise, you highlight in the body, and then you drive home in the CTA. The 5th pillar is going to be all about relevance. There are 5 typical buyer personas, for instance, that we sell into at Chorus. We sell into a VP of sales, we sell into SDR leaders, we sell into sales operations, we sell into sales engagement or sales enablement, and then we also sell into customer success. So each one of those people in buyer persona care about completely different things. For instance, even between sales and sales development, oftentimes we care about different things. So, a good marker of what I've seen in the industry on a sales development leader is that they care about driving more meetings, and they care sometimes about influence, ACV, and conversion into a closed won deal. For sales leaders, it's all about revenue. It's about driving quota attainment and closing more deals. So when some people reach out to me and they talk all about how they help with conversion rates into closed deals, I certainly care about that, and I care about how Chorus does overall in terms of close won revenue. It's a good litmus test on, are the leads that I'm sending over quality? But what I really care about is meetings. So with all of your different buyer personas, it's going to be different for any kind of person listening, to this session. But I would suggest divvying out your different buyer personas, doing a lot of aggressive research on what they do in their day-to-day and what they care about. So then when someone comes to you and asks what you do as a company, I simply wouldn't even give them an answer until I know more about them. So I would know what each different buyer persona cares about and how you can speak to them in a way of what's important to them. The 6th is going to be brevity. Let's just pin it up with this. Never use 7 words when 4 words will do. The 7th is going to be noticeability. So noticeability is all going to be about your subject line. The 3 rules, in my opinion, on a subject line or what you're trying to do is you're trying to get an email open, you're trying to miss the blocker or the spam alert on any kind of email filter. And the 3rd is you want to make sure that you're not a bait and switch. A great example of not deploying this pillar is one of the highest email engagement rates of all time was an email with a subject line that said, "Pictures of your wife cheating on you." And then the body of the email, it was talking all about a weight loss campaign on if you didn't lose weight, then your wife would cheat on you. So it had a massive open rate, but then every single person that opened it was furious because they felt bait and switch. So you want to make sure that you email with integrity of every single person can get an email open with a subject title line of free puppies in the subject line. You want to make sure that you get an open, but you don't bait and switch and make your prospect feel a little bit had if they open it and there's kind of a bait and switch situation of the body is completely different from the subject line. So now we know the structure of an email, we know how to pick out a premise for the first line, and we know the 7 different flavors of things you want to include about your messaging. So now we get to talk all about the 7 deadly sins and the things that you want to make sure are not in your messaging. The first deadly sin is being too casual or too silly. I've seen this a lot in the industry of, SDRs or self-prospecting account executives want to drive rapport with someone that they don't know or someone they're prospecting into. And how they try to do that is by getting them to laugh by sending a GIF, or maybe they're sending the list of like, you're either swallowed by a shark or you're off on an island somewhere or you don't value quota attainment. But all of these things, at the bedrock, everyone wants to be respected. And so how we do that is by divvying out respect to other people. So for instance, if I were to meet former President Barack Obama, when I walked in the door, I would be very, very formal. And the reason being, I would be overly formal as opposed to overly casual with him. And the reason being is I respect him and I have a deep respect for what he's done. And so I want to make sure that I drive that home by being very formal and respectful with him. So the first sin is being too casual, too silly. Another minor point is by saying hey to your prospect as opposed to saying hi. So I don't think that you can go wrong with hi. Hi is the happy medium. The second sin is going to be wasted text. If I were to say there was any sin that was arbitrated against the most, it would be the wasted text. So I know you're busy, but I'm just following up here. I wanted to circle back in blank. I'd love to give you a demo to unpack. If you can draw a line through any piece of your outreach and not lose any value in that email, I would suggest doing so. So this is number 1, it kind of wastes the time of our prospects. But number 2, this is a great way to trigger to your prospect that you're a salesperson. So this is kind of sales lingo. And whenever we open this, I know that usually the driver behind including something like this is you want to act transparent or you want to ensure that you're being honest with someone. But people, because it's used so heavily, it triggers in our brain that it's a salesperson. So even though it feels good to say, first off, this is a sales email, it triggers to our prospect. They just typically, especially if you go up in terms of ICP, in terms of hierarchy, like if you're talking to a vice president or a CEO, which oftentimes we are, they just want you to get to the point. The one asset that they don't have is time. So you want to make sure that you don't waste the time that you do have. The third no-no, as we call it, is being the authority over the prospect. So a little background into ego states. You have 3 ego states in your body. The first is going to be your parent ego state. The second is going to be your adult ego state. And the third is going to be your child ego state. So the parent ego state, let's start there. The parent ego state, if you talk to someone and you command them to do something, you automatically flip them into the child ego state. The child ego state has 2 portions, a natural ego state, which is impressed by bubbles, or think about roller coasters, they're impressed by very little. The other is the adaptive ego state, which basically infuses rebellion. So if you talk to someone in the parent ego state, you automatically get your prospect to flip into the child ego state, and they inherently want to rebel against you. So a great example of this is let me know. If I tell someone or command them really to do anything, if I say, let me know a time that works for you, they inherently want to rebel against that and say, I'm not going to let them know what the time is. So another great example is when you start an email just with their first name. If someone starts an email with Becc, comma, I think that the denotation is that it's a very serious email, that it's someone who's instructing me. So these are all kind of minor items, but the more that they stack up, we want to increase the odds that someone responds to us. So we want to make sure that we're staying away from as many of these as we can. The fourth principle is questioning the prospect's authority. So in my experience, when someone asks me if I'm the decision maker, and I am, then I think, yeah, I am the decision maker, but so what? Would you only be talking to me because I'm the decision maker? What if I wasn't? Would you treat me with the same respect? And the other instance is if I'm not the decision maker. If someone asks me if I'm the decision maker and I'm not, I immediately feel invalidated and like I have to almost make up something for ego. So in both case scenarios, I know that the information that we're after is if someone is the one that makes the final call. but we always want to build internal champions in a relationship between us and our prospects. So in both case scenarios, if I ask someone, are you the decision maker? Or even in the later stage sequences I've seen, or stage of their sequence, I've seen people saying, I guess you're not the right person to talk to. Every single time that I read that, I kind of cringe a little bit. I think I actually am the right person to talk to. You just didn't construct an email in a way that made me want to respond to you. So there's kind of a double no-no of, assuming something that I'm not the decision maker, and putting the accountability on me for not responding. So that's a double no-no. But I'd say in no case scenario throughout email should we be questioning our prospect's authority. The fifth is going to be making your prospect feel okay. A great example of this is mudslinging against competitors. If someone tells me that my jacket doesn't look good, I would inherently feel kind of sad. Even though they weren't insulting me directly, they were insulting my choice if they're insulting the jacket. So oftentimes, if you especially go up in terms of hierarchy into a vice president level or a senior director level or a manager, senior manager level even, they are markered on the types of decisions they make and whether those decisions were successful. So if someone bought your competitor, for instance, let's say we're going between, Outreach and Sales Loft. And if I bought Outreach and then someone reaches out to me and says Outreach is the worst, they're inherently making fun of my decision. So it's almost like making fun of me directly. So you always want to make sure that you avoid mudslinging. Oftentimes I've heard, I have myself talk poorly about someone else, and every single time that I do it, I think about it afterwards and regret doing it. If I say something negative about someone else, it oftentimes says poor things about me as opposed to the person I was talking to. So the famous saying is, what Sarah says about Sally says more about Sarah than Sally. So I would focus on, instead of making your prospect feel not okay by insulting their choices, talking well about the competitor for a line, and then talking about a little bit how you differentiate. The sixth no-no is making your prospect feel stupid. So a great example of this is saying, does that make sense in your outreach? Or do you know what we do as a company? So a great way to be prophylactic about that or antithetical to this is, instead of asking your prospect, does that make sense within your email outreach or just in general, I would say, am I making any sense? So I would make sure to put the onus on me to communicate versus you as a prospect to understand. The seventh principle, or no-no, is glorifying yourself. So I think we were pretty exhaustive about covering that earlier, but make sure in every single conversation, whether that's over email, whether that's over cold call or otherwise, that you want to glorify your current customers, or you want to glorify your prospects over glorying that we're number one. So if you run through any statement in your head and you think, oh, the value is making me feel better as opposed to amping up my prospect, then I would suggest scratching it and starting from the beginning. So in summary, I know that it's fun for us to send out 200 emails or 300 emails at a time and to kind of batch and blast on buyer persona. I've actually been the rep to do that in the past. But a couple of years ago, I had to ask myself two very difficult questions. The first was, do I respond to unpersonalized mass blast? The answer to that was no. And then the second was, do I think my prospects are different than me? That answer was also no. So that's kind of what started this trajectory of me questioning, whether mass blast was the way to go. So I know that it's fun to jam out the emails, but in my experience, if I'm aggressive on the amount of research as opposed to aggressive on volume, then I've been killing my quota. So instead of blasting the emails, blast your quota instead by doing personalized emails. So if you got any value from this session today, I do have a quick favor to ask. The biggest thing that we're trying to do, or the goal of these sessions, is to increase the sales development community's quota attainment and the AE self-prospecting quota attainment, and to help that community turn into one that is full of integrity and is crushing their quota as a result. So how we do that is coverage. So my favor is, if you got any value from today's sessions, please go to LinkedIn, tag a couple of takeaways, tag me in it and Chorus in it so that we can understand if you got value from these sessions and where we can get better during these sessions. So thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.